Hello, everybody. I am the Comics Kid 2099. Happy New Year. We are recording this in the year 2021, but this podcast is going up at the very beginning of 2022. Connor, how is your new year going? Wink.
It's great. Very great. Hey, I just said a thing like a famous person. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about License to Kill, a James Bond movie starring Timothy Dalton, and this is the second of two Timothy Dalton Bond movies. This came out in '89. You chose this because somewhat recently, like a couple months ago, we had the latest Bond movie, No Time to Die, and so this is kind of a delayed tie-in to that. And our Twin Peaks connection is Everett McGill. And so, Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about License to Kill?
That's right. I guess this is a little bit of a tie-in for the home video release of No Time to Die. Why don't we say that?
Yeah.
So, License to Kill is the 1989 James Bond film. This is the 16th official James Bond movie released by Eon Productions, as well as the fifth consecutive James Bond film and final James Bond film to be directed by John Glenn, as well as you had mentioned the second and final appearance as with Timothy Dalton in the lead role. The plot of this movie centers around a drug trafficker played by Robert Davi, who critically injures James Bond's American best friend Felix Leiter and murders his newlywed wife. And this sends James Bond on a plot for revenge. He says, I am going to turn my back on MI6. I'm going to become a rogue agent. And this was actually the first time I think that had ever actually been used in a James Bond movie. So this was still kind of novel. And basically it starts out kind of like a drug trafficking kind of like French Connection movie, and then it becomes a James Bond movie. It becomes a lot more extravagant. There's more globetrotting as it goes along. Women show up to be very attracted to James Bond. He orders a martini. He goes to a casino. He wears a tuxedo. He shoots some bad guys. Q shows up with some gadgets, etc., etc. The bad guy has an extravagant mansion, and there's some pretty over the top action scenes, some gadgets, some one-liners, some stunts. It becomes a James Bond movie. Although this one is notable because early on in the movie it showed some of the more serious side of Bond that would later go on to define the, I think, Daniel Craig era that just ended. This is often seen as a very underrated classic, but let's see how we felt about it. Comics Kid, how did you feel about License to Kill?
I really like this movie. I am not the biggest Bond connoisseur. I think I've watched all of the Connery movies except for the one that wasn't an official Bond movie. It was a remake of one of the others that he did. I haven't seen that one. And I saw the one with George Lazenby. I have not watched any of the Roger Moore movies. When I was a kid, I saw bits and pieces of the Pierce Brosnan movies. I remember seeing bits and pieces of this one when I was a kid. In fact, years later, trying to remember the scene in this movie where the woman has the camera and it shoots a laser out, I was convinced in my adulthood that was from a Pierce Brosnan movie, but it's actually from this one. I've seen a few of the Daniel Craig movies, so I am like loosely familiar with the whole Bond mythos, but I would say this is like top tier Bond for me. I think this rides that line between like it's serious when it needs to be serious, but it's got a couple of funny moments in it. I really like this movie. There are some things that we can talk about that I maybe will cast a more critical eye towards, but I had a lot of fun watching this.
Yeah, I guess to briefly describe my history with the James Bond franchise, I was really into these movies in my last year of elementary school. So that was my sixth grade, and my sixth grade went from '06 to '07, and that was, I remember the summer of '07. there were still several James Bond movies I needed to watch, but because 007, is 007 and 2007 has 007 within that year. I remember that summer, a lot of channels played James Bond marathons. And so the James Bond movies that I could not get my hands on at local video stores or at the library, I was able to watch that way. And I remember at that point, that's when things started to really blur together. I don't know if it was because they were playing on TV and I was paying less attention to them. Maybe I can't even remember if there were ad breaks or not. But the later Roger Moore James Bond movies and the Timothy Dalton movies, they all just sort of blend together in my head from way back then. So I think I've definitely seen this movie before, but this felt like I was basically watching it for the first time. And I thought it was all right. I think I kind of want to reject the notion that this is a very underrated James Bond movie. But I like it. It's a solid Bond flick. I actually had a pretty not strong a response to it, but I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Okay. Why don't we start? Uh, hmm. I was gonna say, like, let's start somewhere, and then I realized I don't. You know what? Let's start with our Twin Peaks connection. I was surprised to see Everett McGill show up as early as he did. For some reason, I was thinking he would show up towards the end. He would be like some of the cavalry who would show up and be, backup for James, and he wouldn't get a whole lot of dialogue. But I was surprised to see him in a few scenes, and I thoroughly enjoyed him in this movie.
I did too. I think it's worth noting that in this movie, he plays a character named Ed. Just throwing that out there.
Mm-hmm.
In Twin Peaks, he plays a Big Ed Hurley, and I don't know, maybe some headcanon. Maybe he didn't get eaten by a shark. Maybe he fell into the pit with the sharks, and there was just another hunk of meat that the shark was eating, and he was like, "What am I doing? I gotta go back to my hometown in Washington and just run a gas station, and that's it." Maybe that's the headcanon you could go with if you want to. But I agree. It was really nice to see Everett McGill. Like he has a relatively small role in this movie, but he's actually in a lot more of it than I thought he would be. I thought he was going to be in like 2 scenes and then die, but he was more like in 5 scenes and then he died.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Were you surprised that he ended up being in the pocket of Sanchez, the bad guy?
That was a detail I thought I remembered. I
Okay.
didn't. I remember his death scene from when I was a kid. I actually did not remember that was who died though. I think he
Okay.
has one of the coolest deaths though.
Yeah, I think the second coolest death. There's one other one that has stuck with me for over half my life. But yeah, when they were putting Sanchez in the armored car, I had flashbacks to season 1 of Daredevil, the Netflix show, and I was thinking Sanchez was going to say, "I am reminded of the story of the Good Samaritan. I am not the Samaritan. I am the ill intent." I was expecting him to go on a little rant, but then Big Ed just takes a shotgun and just pistol butts, a guy in the face. And I was like, oh, okay. And like he had just said, like, your money's no good here, Sanchez. And then he's like, nope, it's a lot of good. He says to Felix, I think that's some good dough to pass up or something like that. But yeah, he even kind of sounds like Big Ed. Like when you watch David Lynch's Dune, you can tell it's Everett McGill, but he doesn't have that Southern twang. But here, like he kind of sounds like Big Ed. So I will say, while I wasn't anticipating your headcanon, I won't shoot down your headcanon either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching with a keen eye when I was watching this, because when I heard the name Ed and he responded to it, I perked up.
Mm-hmm.
Like a little girl. I was very excited by that. I guess for context, we should probably, if someone hasn't seen this movie, the specific kind of scenario is Sanchez is this drug smuggler, this international drug smuggler who has a very loyal network of people, including Benicio del Toro. But and Felix Leiter, who's basically the American James Bond, he has been trying to bring down Sanchez for a long time, and now that they got him into custody, Sanchez is obviously bribing people, and he bribes Big Ed, Everett McGill. He bribes him $2 million, And Everett McGill makes a big stink about absolutely not. But when they're transporting him from holding to, I assume, prison or someplace, Everett McGill shows his true colors as a traitor. And James Bond sees Felix Leiter, who becomes injured. He gets bitten by a shark pretty hard. Like I think he loses his legs or something to the shark. And he's like, in intensive care at the hospital. James Bond, he wants revenge on Sanchez, obviously, but he's also wanting to. He blames Everett McGill as the guy, who was the traitor. So he gets his revenge by having the $2 million, and Everett McGill is hanging above a shark pit, and James Bond, with the $2 million in his briefcase, throws it at Everett McGill, who lets go of the rope to catch the $2 million, and that sends him plummeting into the shark pit where Felix Leiter had been a few scenes prior.
Yeah. Now, you may know this more than I do. Does Felix show up in any capacity before Casino Royale after this?
Oh, I don't think so, because while there are 4 more movies before they full on reboot with Casino Royale. There's 6 years between this and GoldenEye, which I think until the gap between Spectre and No Time to Die, it was the longest between James Bond movies. And when Pierce Brosnan came on, they got us a new Moneypenny, a new M. They did quite a bit of rebooting in that movie as well, and I don't think Felix is in those 4 films.
Okay, I knew that Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid, he was an American agent, I think, or maybe he was a Russian agent, but he was helping James. He's an ally who's not a British agent. I don't think I've seen a complete Pierce Brosnan movie from the Bond franchise, but I knew he was like a Felix type, but I didn't know if maybe they kind of said, oh, Felix, he's fine, he just needed a week of bed rest and he's back on his feet, or if they just kind of wrote him out with this movie.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They just never used that character again, so I guess we may never know.
And do you prefer Felix being kind of older than James, or do you? Because in Dr. No, Felix is played by Jack Lord from Hawaii Five-0, the TV series, and that is not my favorite Bond movie, but that might be my favorite version of Felix, because you next see him, I think, in Goldfinger, and I don't remember the actor in Goldfinger, but he's a little older than James, and then here you get the feeling he's a little older than James, and I don't know in the books if they make a point of saying Felix has been doing this a little longer than James, or if that was just, we can't get Jack Lord again, let's just get somebody else, it doesn't matter who. But for myself, I kind of prefer Felix who's a little younger, and you can believe that he would actually be out there in the field along with James.
I agree. I think Jack Lord is also my favorite Felix Leiter. I think he has that cool, suave thing down. Many times Felix is just kind of like a clown who shows up bumbling. He might as well be J.W. Pepper from the first 2 Roger Moore films. Have you seen any clips of that character?
No, it's not Jimmy Dean, is it?
No, it's Clifton James, who is the do you remember in Superman 2 there's that sheriff of that small town?
Yeah.
Okay. He's in 2 James Bond movies, and he is if being a redneck was if you could make a redneck minstrel show, if that was possible, that's what he is in the first 2. He is the stereotype ugly American. He's got a big chew jaw, a big chew lip, and he's always hooting and hollering, and he's hilarious. I mean, he's horrible, but he's hilarious. I can't stop laughing whenever he's on screen, because I can't believe they thought to put that character in a James Bond movie. But honestly, some of Felix Leiter's interpretations over the years have not been far off from that character.
And I should say, I don't dislike Jeffrey Wright. I think he's a good actor, but I don't think he ever got much to do in any of the Bond movies he was in. He just kind of shows up and is like, hey, I'm Felix. And it's like, oh, okay. And then Bond goes back to doing whatever he does. But
Jeffrey Wright decided he wanted to have a character actor body, so then they said, okay, you don't need to be in the James Bond franchise anymore.
Speaking of these movies, you were talking about the Roger Moore era, but speaking of these movies almost descending into parody, the very beginning of the movie, there is a scene I feel like isn't far off from being in like the Naked Gun movies. So James and Felix and Sharky, who is Felix's friend, they are on their way to Felix's wedding with the third blonde from Three's Company. For all two of you who have seen Three's Company, she was the third blonde roommate. The whole time I was like, who is this woman? I recognize her from somewhere. But they're on their way to the wedding, and then a helicopter like flies by their car with a big sign on their window that says, "Follow me." And I was thinking, oh, this is a trap. But then, and James says, "Friends of yours?" And it says right on the helicopter, "Coast Guard," in gigantic letters. And then I was thinking, like, James, you can read, right? But then, so they like go on this quick little mission, and they're like, "Oh, tell Sharky, tell the fiance we'll be there in a little bit." And so they take care of Sanchez. They capture him, and then like James, he like is lowered down on top of Sanchez's plane and like wraps up the plane in a big cable, and then they tow it off, and then Felix and James jump out of the helicopter or the plane that they're in with parachutes. And like normally in real life, like because the plane they're in or helicopter, I can't remember, is like hovering a few hundred feet right above the church. And like apparently Felix's fiance can tell that it's Felix in the helicopter, but they're pretty far up. But they jump. And normally in real life, like once you deploy your parachute, you're at the mercy of the wind. And so with how high up they were, it could have been like a few miles that they would have been dropped off. But they conveniently, they drop right in front of the church. And then the priest is like, "All right, everybody, get inside." And then like we see them heading into the church with their parachutes still attached to them. And in that moment, I was thinking like, this looks like it would be something Lieutenant Frank Drebin would do in one of the Naked Gun movies. Like, it doesn't look far off from that. But then we get into the more, air quotes, serious, grim and gritty stuff in the movie. But I was thoroughly entertained by that.
That was fun. You can also tell that Christopher Nolan is a fan of this movie because, I mean, Bane basically does the exact same thing with a plane in The Dark Knight Rises right off the top.
Mm-hmm. And the skyhook thing that they do in Dark Knight is similar to this kind of.
Yeah, I guess so. It's just kind of funny where you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Christopher Nolan's a big Bond fan. I guess one thing that's kind of neat about this opening sequence is that it's a little unusual because it's directly related to the plot of the rest of the movie, and
yeah,
that's uncommon. But I would also say that I like that this is in here mostly because it does kind of show you the friendship that James and Felix have.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that.
Yes. To what Connor is referring is if you watch, say, Goldfinger, at the beginning of Goldfinger, there's a duck floating on, in the docks, and somebody's got a gun and like, a duck, and then he walks away, and then the duck like lifts up, and James is underneath the little duck decoy, and he like throws it aside. He's wearing a wetsuit. He takes out some criminal operation, and it has nothing to do with Arik Goldfinger and his plot in the rest of the movie. That is usually called the Bond cold open. Has very little, if anything, to do with the rest of the movie. It's just there to show you, isn't Bond awesome? And here we get Bond doesn't do a whole lot in his cold open. It's really, I mean, he does lower out of the helicopter to tie a cable to the plane, but Felix tells Bond, "You stay here with the plane. We're going in to take care of business." And so, like, you get to see that Bond is not the only player in town. And like you were saying, it does have something to do with the rest of the movie, which is kind of an unusual note for a James Bond movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they also capture Sanchez, which is, of course, the inciting incident for the rest of the story. I guess, like, the inciting incident is him getting busted out, right? Him getting freed. So I guess we have a little bit of a prologue showing you how he got captured. But yeah, I guess like the next, when it comes to these James Bond movies, there's a checklist, right? Does it have this? Does it have that? You got to go down the checklist. Of course, after the cold open, well, I guess we skipped the gun barrel, but I never have anything to say about gun barrels. So.
Oh, I think we do get to see it. The classic, like he shoots the guy, the gun barrel. We get that in this. I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah, we do. I was just saying, like, I have nothing to say about the gun barrel.
Oh, gotcha.
Except
Yeah.
It's just yeah. Timothy
It's here.
Dalton walked. He shot at the camera, and blood came down all right. So but yeah, so there was that. There's the cold open. Then we have the opening credit sequence, which this one is I do not like the '80s James Bond. Like I don't like any of them. I hate how they try to incorporate animated and live action elements, as well as like the 007 logo is like always in like these like little circular lights. It's made up out of like, you know what I mean, like little circle like LED lights or something, laser lights. I don't know. I don't like it. It's an Octopussy. It's in the Living Daylights. It's in this. It's I don't like it at all, and I'm glad we stopped doing it.
Yeah, I kind of zoned out during the whole theme opening. I was more distracted by. I don't think that it's actually him, but it sounded like either like Michael Jackson or Prince singing like, "Yeah, it's James Bond in License to Kill." Ooh. And I was just thinking like, this like the rest of the movie doesn't feel this cheesy, but this song feels like again like it would be in a parody of a James Bond movie and not an actual James Bond movie. And then
Well, oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
well, like the last song, the song that ends the movie also feels so out of place with the rest of the movie.
I would agree. The most '80s thing about this movie is like people's hair. But outside of that, like the movie does a good job of sort of feeling a little timeless. And then you get the songs and like the songs that kind of bookend. They are so '80s in a way that is like horribly dated. People like to remember the '80s like, oh yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy. It's so '80s, and The Breakfast Club, and you're remembering all the good things about the '80s. Most of the '80s was really lame. All right, and this like the very '80s elements of this movie showcase that. I would say. Look, I know my dad was a big fan of Gladys Knight. My dad's a big R&B fan. He likes Brian McKnight and Gladys Knight, and I don't know, man. I would say poor fit for a James Bond theme, and the theme itself doesn't even fit this movie at all. Usually, what would happen is in like a James Bond movie is that I guess this is a more newer thing to do, but the melody of the Bond song typically shows up in the orchestration of the movie. So
Mhm.
when you have like the horrible Sam Smith song from Spectre, that like melody will show up in like the music throughout it, but Sam Smith is not singing over the song. It's like a violin playing that part or something.
Mhm.
Anyways, it's a very small part of the movie. It really is inconsequential, but I don't like the Bond song this time around.
For my money, I feel like for my money penny,
Uh,
I
uh, uh.
I feel like they should kind of, even if you're making a Bond movie in 2025, I think you should do a song that sounds a little bit like it could fit in a 60s Bond movie. Like, I really like the Goldfinger theme song. I think that that should be like the standard that you put James Bond movies to. You may disagree, but I feel like even if it's in the 80s, 90s, or today, it should sound something like that. I'm not the biggest fan of Adele. I think I like a grand total of one of her songs, but I think her voice is like made to do James Bond pastiche songs. And so even though I'm not a big fan of the movie Skyfall, I think that her doing the soundtrack for that was like, okay, yeah, this is what a James Bond opening should sound like, in my opinion.
I would agree, and I think that with Skyfall, and I would say since Skyfall, there's definitely a pattern there of them trying to emulate that sort of '60s more lounge singer type. Like my favorite James Bond song is "Thunderball" by Tom Jones,
Hmm.
mostly because Tom Jones is just like a meme for me. I love him, but he is like it's insane that there's like Tom Jones is like a real guy, right? But like it also makes complete sense that there would be a pop star like Tom Jones who's got this crazy over the top voice that almost sounds like a parody of a lounge singer, but it's like completely sincere. I love it. I love it so much. And Thunderball is delightful. The way he hangs on that last note for so long is glorious. But yeah, anyways, to get past that, then we get to like the movie proper. How did like so like when people talk about this movie, when I hear them talk about it, they always talk about how like, oh, this is like a you have to remember the context, right? Like this is coming after the Roger Moore era, which got just more and more goofy and silly and comedic as those movies went on. And for a lot of people, his final movie, A View to a Kill, is the worst James Bond movie ever. And I know for a lot of people, The Living Daylights was like a step in the right direction. But this movie, License to Kill, was where, oh, they really tapped into something that, you know, we hadn't seen in a James Bond movie before. And when people talk about this, what they'll talk about is how it's very gritty. This is the first, I think this is the first PG-13 James Bond movie. It's gritty, it's more violent, there's like more gore, it's about like revenge, and people remember this is a lot more violent. And I think it is what a lot of people talk about it as for like the first, I would say, 45 minutes to an hour. It doesn't even really feel like a James Bond movie for like, once you get out of the James Bond song. For a while, it doesn't feel like a James Bond movie. I would say.
Yeah. Like you said, like there's all the elements that you think of with Bond. Like he's sleeping with all the women, and probably a casino in there somewhere. And I mean that seems like that's in like there's the one with the guy with the eye patch. It's in the Connery era. I can't remember which one.
That's Thunderball, baby.
Okay.
That's like my favorite movie.
All right, yeah. Thunderball has a casino scene. This one has a casino scene. Casino Royale obviously has a casino scene. So that's almost probably one that you kind of have to have. And then, like you said, like he's wearing a tux. He wants to shaken, not stirred. And so, like I feel like this movie could have maybe benefited from being a little bit less like James Bond. Like at one point, M says, you are supposed to be in Istanbul. And James is like, Felix has been halfway eaten by a shark. I'm going to get revenge. And M says, the Americans will take care of it. And James says, no, they won't. I'm going to do it. And then if you don't want me doing that, then I'll resign. And so then James goes on the run. And like you said, this is, I think, the first time that he really becomes a rogue agent. And I will say, that kind of loses its steam when it happens in literally every single movie, Daniel Craig. But here, I'm like, oh, cool. Like, what's going to happen? Oh, he finds millions of dollars and he uses that to fund his attacks. And he might as well be working for MI6. Like, normally when he's on a mission, if he needs to attack a crime lord and bring down the operations, they would give him lots of money to do that. And they would give him the cool gadgets. And Q just pops up and says, here's some cool gadgets. And I like, what's his name? Desmond Llewellyn. I like him in this movie. I liked him as Q. He is what I think of when I think of Q. But when I'm thinking of you're going to do a movie where James Bond becomes a rogue agent, I think maybe we would have been better off if he didn't have all the funky gadgets and he didn't find millions of dollars and use that against what's his name, Sanchez. It would have been cooler if he's just having to rely on his wits and all he has is like a gun and 6 bullets or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, and that's like the thing is, I see this movie's influence actually a lot on the Craig era, and not just like in their approach to Bond, but just in like story stuff. And I like, for example, the ending of this movie. I feel like the ending of Quantum of Solace is looking a lot at the ending of this movie. Not just that they're in the desert, but just a lot of visual stuff. Like it's super explosion heavy, and the bad guy gets set on fire and has like an axe or a machete or something, and whatever. But also, yeah, you're right. Every single James Bond movie, every single Craig movie, he's a rogue agent. Like after Casino Royale, so he has 3 movies in a row where he's a rogue agent, and then the 4th movie, or his last movie, his 5th movie, is that's where he's not even really officially James Bond anymore. Or no, he's not even officially 007 anymore. He's still James Bond, but he's not officially 007. Mm-hmm. But in the rogue agent Daniel Craig trilogy, they all have that same thing where I'm a rogue agent, but I got Moneypenny and I got Q on the inside giving me some help. Mm-hmm. and that's what happens here as well. And I'm gonna give him a pass this time, but I feel like when you see that same thing happen multiple times, it sort of poisons the well for that concept in total. So even going back to this, there's a part of me that's like, okay, like he can't really be a rogue agent. he still is getting help from Q. He's still getting help from Moneypenny, and M's not really cracking down hard. Like he raises his voice in a couple of scenes, but it's not like that ever affects the plot or any of like the actions that James could take in the plot. But it's fine. It's a fun shakeup for the status quo. And what I do like about this movie is that there is still some kind of continuity with the other movies. Like it's alluded, like On Her Majesty's Secret Service is alluded to with James Bond getting married. And I don't know, there's some continuity stuff that's brought up throughout this movie that is pretty neat, but it does, as a James Bond movie, stand alone pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever heard, there's this theory that every time you get a new James Bond actor, that is a different character taking on the identity of 007/James Bond, and that there is no real James Bond. The problem with that is, I believe in one of the Roger Moore movies, he visits the grave of Tracy Bond, who married George Lazenby. And also in this, they mention that he was married once. They technically don't say to Tracy Bond, but I think the implication is that it's Tracy Bond. And so that's an idea that when you first hear it, it's like, oh, okay. Like there was a movie with Woody Allen called Casino Royale in the 60s. And I think Orson Welles was in it. And that, I think, is where that theory first began, that like there's multiple James Bonds. But when you watch these movies, it's very clear that cannot possibly be. And so it's just an interesting idea, but nothing more.
Yeah, and I like that fan theory. I like to, but you have to do a lot of headcanon in order for that to actually work. And yeah, so George Lazenby, he gets married to Diana Rigg, and she gets shot up and dies, and he's sad about it. I mean, I would also be very sad if Diana Rigg was my bride and got killed before, I could enjoy life with her. But then the very next movie, Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery is back as Bond, and he's going on a murderous rampage looking for Blofeld. And I mean, they don't come out and say why, but if you saw the last movie, you know why. You know what I mean? Like he's angry that Diana Rigg got killed. So, yeah. Anyways, but when it comes to like the plot of this movie, what I like is that you were mentioning that you kind of would have preferred if it did without the James. It felt a little less like a James Bond movie. I think for a while it doesn't really feel like a James Bond movie. It actually feels more like something akin to The French Connection than, I don't know, Octopussy or something. And I guess that's kind of the part of the movie where I kind of say like I have a little bit of hesitation with this movie, because I think when it is being a James Bond movie, like a classical kind of globe-trotting, big and extravagant affair, I think it's doing a pretty good job at being that. This is like I said, John Glenn's 5th consecutive James Bond film. He knows how to do these movies. I also think it's a pretty good sort of French Connection style, like gritty international espionage flick. That's more gritty and crime oriented with like the drug element. I just think when it tries to just transition from one to the other, I feel like by the time we get to the end, it's so far removed from where it started.
I'm curious if you agree with this. For me, I would, and I have not seen The French Connection, but I'm going to go with your comparison. I'm going to say it stops being that French Connection-esque movie around the point when Q shows up in the apartment. When he shows up and says, "Here's some gadgets," I feel like that's kind of when it just goes back to being Bond. Do you think that's an accurate description, or do you think it happens earlier?
I would say it starts happening earlier, but that is the point when it does fully become like a traditional James Bond movie. It's when he meets not Charlize Theron in the they meet each other in the bar, and you're like, okay, this is normal. And then they get on a boat and start making out, and you're like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it's a James Bond movie now.
I was waiting. If this was a Police Squad movie, this is what would have happened. she like they're playing the music, the like, oh, they're about to kiss music. They're playing that music, and they're trying to make a deal because he needs her help, and he will pay her. He says 50 million, and she says 100 million, or maybe it's 100,000 or 50,000. And then like they're kind of moving in closer, and then they finally settle on 75,000. And then I was really hoping this is what would happen. She's like an inch away from his mouth, and when he says 75, then she would just say, okay, deal, and then like back off, and the music just cuts, and then like she like starts getting out gadgets. It's like, okay, we're gonna need to go to this dock to get in on a plane, and then like she just doesn't see him as a romantic possibility at all. I think that would have been perfect. You I'm a little confused on like at what point did she fall in love with James, and at what point did Sanchez's girlfriend fall in love with James? Because that's like they're both kind of, well, redheaded lady is kind of catty with the Sanchez's girlfriend a little bit because Bond slept with her, and I was just thinking like when like this whole plot has taken up like 2 days maybe, and like James met Sanchez's girlfriend, and she like yelled at him like, why can't you men just be less violent? And he's like, it's your boyfriend that fed my friend to a shark. He is the one who's being violent, and you like he whipped you, so like it's not me. But like then the next time they meet each other, she's like, hey, he's going to eat lunch with the Asians, and she sits on his bed, and she's like, so bed. And then like she goes to talk to Q and the redheaded woman, and they're like, oh, Bond is on his way back to England. And she said, no, he spent the night with me. And then the redheaded woman's upset, and I was just like, when did these characters have time to fall in love with him? Like, and what's weird about it is, I mean, yes, it takes two to tango, but he is almost like every other scene, he is telling Q and the redheaded woman, all right, thanks for your help. Now get out of here. I work better alone. And that's like 80% of his dialogue in the movie. And then he tells, what's her name? Like, you need to, it's not good for you to be in my room. Like, he fed Felix to a shark, and she's like, it's okay. And so like, James isn't putting the moves on these women like he would if he was like Sean Connery would be more the one initiating the love making, whereas in this the women are the ones kind of doing it. And you know what, that's cool.
Yeah.
Women, you do your thing. Yeah. Some of us would never get any if you didn't. But I I feel like because I was reading that apparently they like lessened the sex stuff because of the AIDS scare of the 80s. But then watching this, you wouldn't know that because he's got a thing going with both of these women in this movie.
Yeah, so that's I guess this is a good segue into just kind of talking about Timothy Dalton as Bond. I think the aspects of Bond that he gets absolutely right that is in the books, from what I understand, I've actually not read the books, but in the books, Bond is very snooty. And I think that Timothy Dalton captures that aspect very well, where he is like a man of refined taste, and he kind of carries himself, and he's a little pompous and snooty. And I think that tracks right with this portrayal. Like there's that part where he's talking to not Charlize Theron, and he's like, hey, we're south of the border. This is a man's, this is a man's world. And he's kind of like dismissive of her being a woman, and he kind of has like that. I don't know, like, the way he carries himself. He seems very like old fashioned and like refined taste, dignified, kind of in a classical sense, old fashioned sense, I should say. I think he captures that very well. I think he captures the intensity of Bond. I think he captures a lot of the things about Bond. But when it comes to Bond, I don't think Dalton captures like the sex appeal or like the suave kind of charm that every other Bond before him and since has had. I think he's like the least, like if you're gonna have a Bond that doesn't have a Bond girl, it's Timothy Dalton, right?
Mhm.
And because like he seems so uninterested, like when he's playing the character, he seems so uninterested in like the women around him. And you're right, 80% of his dialogue is I work better alone. uh, and so I don't know, like I think maybe that's why like maybe like the women in this, that's like my least favorite element of the movie, because you're right, when do like I it's like they don't even have a scene where they kind of have like, oh, we have something in common, or like it just like there's no small talk. Like in Doctor No, there's like a scene or two of James and Honey Rider at least just having small talk where she talks about her dad or something, right? Like,
Mhm.
give me something like they're negotiating going on a mission, and that's the foreplay. You know what I mean? Like that, it feels so like the romance feels so like inserted because this is a James Bond movie and this is in James Bond movies.
Yeah. I was actually expecting because at the end of the movie, the Sanchez's girlfriend, she's like, you could stay with here with me for the rest of our lives, and he says, actually, I think you make a better couple with El Presidente. And I was like, what? These two haven't even talked to each other in the movie. What are you talking about? And so he jumps off the balcony into the swimming pool and pulls not Charlize Theron into the swimming pool. And honestly, like, if this wanted to be a parody, I'm going to keep saying this, he would have said, well, I can't choose, ladies. What about a three-way? How does that sound? Like, that would have felt very Bond, I guess. But at the beginning of the movie, after Felix and the lady from Three's Company are finally married and they're about to go enjoy their honeymoon, she throws her garter at James, and he's like, no. And then he walks away, and Felix says, yeah, he was married once. And on the one hand, like, if you're just watching this in isolation, it's kind of a cool idea that maybe James is like, he's a little bit somber and bitter because his wife died, and he doesn't want to allow himself to get close to a woman again, because what if the same thing happens? What if he falls in love and then she gets killed because he lives a dangerous lifestyle? In theory, that's an interesting idea, but in real life, it had been like 20 years since Diana Rigg married George Lazenby, because I want to say that was 69, I think, the summer I got my first real six string. But this was 89. And so it's been a long time since Diana Rigg or Tracy Bond was like referenced. And like you had an entire like two Bonds in between this and then. And like maybe if they had thrown in a line like, oh, it's the anniversary of Tracy's death, so he's a little bit moody right now. But like throughout the movie, there's that one instance where he says like, no, like, and then he walks away and she throws him the garter. But then after that, he keeps saying like, I work better alone. Like maybe you could have followed up on that where like, it's not that he's sexist when he tells her like, you're an amateur, and she's like listing her resume. Cause I was a little like, this felt like James Bond from the 1950s telling a woman like, you belong in the kitchen, and she's like, it's 1989, like I was in the Air Force, I've done all these missions, I'm not an amateur. But maybe that would have worked a little better if he was thinking about Tracy and how she got caught in the crossfire of his life. And he could have said, look, my friend Felix also was a veteran of this lifestyle, and he got taken out like an amateur, so it's not just that I think you're a woman. And I'm looking at this more as like, I wish this had stepped back a little bit from the James Bond elements, and it sounds like maybe you're kind of wishing they had amped up the woman, like him in the sexy elements a little bit more. Does that sound accurate?
Well, I would say if you're going to go classic James Bond, then do that. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Because the way Timothy Dalton is playing the role, he's playing it consistently throughout. He is, I am getting revenge on Robert Davi for killing Felix Leiter. I feel like the movie around him kind of forgets that and transforms into a classic James Bond movie halfway through. And I think because the Bond girl element is like, I think that's the element that does stick out the most, because as far as like the Bond villain and the villain scheme, like all of that is tangentially related to the start because it's all coming from Sanchez. And Bond sort of is playing the long game where he's not just trying to get revenge on Sanchez, he's trying to burn his whole operation to the ground, right? And so it's like, okay, this is like getting more extravagant and globetrotty and classic James Bond, but I can see the connections with it. It's when it involves MI6, and then like it has to involve these women because it's a James Bond movie where like I would prefer either cut them or make that element better.
Yeah. And I think, I don't remember if I told you this off camera last time we spoke, or if I said this to you while we were recording, but I have tried before marathoning through James Bond, and I usually get kind of tired of it around the end of the Connery era. And so for me, I don't mind a classic James Bond movie with all the elements that you expect. But for this, what I was enjoying more was that it was half-heartedly taking a step away from that direction. And so I probably would have preferred it didn't try to sort of hold hands with the classic elements, but also try to do something new.
Yeah, and if it was all doing the kind of newer thing where they kind of just did a stripped down, grittier international crime James Bond thing, like let's say they never left Miami, that would have been cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that wouldn't have been unprecedented, because like Goldfinger is just James Bond on vacation. He's in
Yeah.
Miami for a little bit, and then he's in like Kansas or Kentucky. Like he's
I think Kentucky, because I think
yeah.
Felix is eating KFC at one point.
Yeah. That's Felix Leiter post Doctor No, everybody. Uh, so, but like he's in
His partner says, should we go in and be his backup? And you see Felix, like, it cuts over and he's just drinking chicken grease, like, no, I gotta finish this box.
And it's like it's not like Kentucky's. There's some natural beauty to the American Midwest, right? And they absolutely capture it, but it's not like, oh, we're going to the exotic locale of Kentucky, right? But like so it's like the most famous James Bond movie is arguably the least exotic, right? And there are like a few other times where James Bond doesn't really travel a whole lot. I think Thunderball mostly just takes place in one location, like one country, and like off the coast of whatever country they're in. So it's not like it's unprecedented. If they just like stayed in Miami and had, or maybe they went to Cuba, you know what I mean? Like it was just Miami and Cuba, and that was it. Like, that would have been cool. But yeah, and it's like one of those things where okay, you go to Robert Davi's house and he's like an international drug dealer, and his mansion is just like insane and it looks like a James Bond villain lair.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool with that too. And the way this movie ends, like the climax, it is more in line with what we're talking about, the kind of newer, grittier, less classic version of a James Bond climax, because it's just four big semi trucks and a few other vehicles and people with guns. There aren't like space lasers and like what I mean. Like there's a facility that catches fire, but it's not like it's this long, excessive like showcasing just how amazing the set is. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually a pretty small part of the movie.
Yeah. And of course, I haven't seen any of the Roger Moore movies. I was aware that one of them actually goes into space. I've heard people say that the Roger Moore movies get pretty silly and over the top. I think for me, the moment where the franchise kind of like went too far was when Sean Connery uses a jetpack, and it was like a real jetpack that was provided them by some like organization, and they told him, we're not going to let you guys use this jetpack unless you like wear the helmet and follow all the safety protocols and stuff. But in my mind, I was like, jetpack is maybe taking it a little too far for Bond. Like I would prefer like he's got his Walter PK and he's got maybe a Geiger counter like in Doctor No. Like I don't need the really over the top gadgets for myself.
Yeah, I get that. And that's what you're talking like. That's the beginning of Thunderball. Like Thunderball is where like there is a title shift. Like I think for me, the sweet spot of James Bond is Thunderball and You Only Live Twice.
Mm-hmm.
They're silly. Their plots are complete nonsense. And are they even good? I don't know. But I like them a lot. They kind of like create this weird identity where like no other movie in the world are like them. And I really like those. I think like the first two, Doctor No and From Russia with Love, are like just real, I think, solid, good spy movies that star a guy named James Bond. And
Mm-hmm.
then Goldfinger is like the sweet spot where it's getting a little silly, a little goofier, but there's enough that is played straight to where it still feels like a normal movie. And then you get to the next two that Sean Connery did, and they're nuts. They're like super groovy 60s kind of, playing by their own. That's where I think the James Bond movies found their own identity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but then I think the Roger Moore stuff does take that identity and get too silly with it. And then I think I only saw Diamonds Are Forever once. I know people hate that movie, so maybe that's where they went too silly with it to begin with. But when it comes to this, though, I appreciate them trying to take those goofier elements, and they're also trying to ground those too. And I think from where we're sitting now in 2021, like these more grounded elements of the goofy stuff feel normal after Daniel Craig. Uh, but I think in context, this is actually kind of cool.
Yeah. I think for me, I kind of like. I'm gonna sound like a hypocrite because like there are some really silly moments in this, but I really like them. There's a part where they're in a dive bar and somebody takes a swordfish off the wall and is like trying to stab James with the swordfish, and it's hilarious. But also, you could die from getting stabbed by a stuffed swordfish. So like, it feels dangerous enough, even though like I would say the movie doesn't quite give you enough time to say this is kind of silly. Like it would have been really silly if James went to the other side of the room and grabbed another swordfish and they had like an actual sword fight. But like it's just getting a little flirty with this is kind of silly, but it's not quite going over the edge with it. But I like I think there's for the most part it's got it's got like a camera that shoots a laser and then like it takes a photograph of you as a skeleton. That's a little silly, but it doesn't have any part to play in the movie. Like his gadgets are basically plastique and like a gun that only recognizes his hand signature. And so like those aren't super out there gadgets for me.
Yeah, no, that's honestly just like back to basics, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, he fights ninjas.
Yeah.
I
I was a little
remembered
confused about that because like these are like the James Bonds of Hong Kong. Like they're not. I don't know why they're dressed up as ninjas. Like at one point they say we've been trying to take down Sanchez for years, and it's, like the whole time I was like, why are they ninjas? Why aren't they dressed in suits? I don't get it. But that
If
guy,
you're ninjas, how come you didn't just strike at him from the shadows?
yeah.
Uh,
But that
but
guy who's in charge of the Hong Kong operation, he is like a real actor. He was in one of the Mortal Kombat movies, I think. And I haven't seen those, but I recognize him from like trailers and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's what I know him from.
You're right. I thought I had seen him before. He's the bad guy from the first Mortal Kombat movie. Um, which, by the way, the original Mortal Kombat movie is actually 12 days older than I am.
Oh,
That's a fun fact. It's also, I think, significantly. Uh, it has aged significantly worse than I have, and I just want to say that I am not a paradigm of health. So just throwing that out there. Um, sorry. There's something I wanted to say about the Bond girls.
yeah.
Because we meet one of the Bond girls in that bar, and when we first meet her, that's the Charlize Theron looking one. She's really cool. I like her. She has like a shotgun, and she's like, capable and has like a fun attitude, and she helps him get out of there. And then it's
My,
like they negotiate something, they negotiate price, and she just like becomes a different character, and she's like so heartbroken that James doesn't want to be with her, and it's like weird because she's like acting like a high school girl, and it's just like odd, right? And
yes.
it's like and it's weird because like I think that actress is actually a pretty good actress, and it's especially noticeable when the other actress is really bad. Uh, Sanchez's girlfriend, like, geez, whoa. I think it's probably a good thing that we don't dub over all the actresses that we hire as Bond girls anymore. But man, if there was ever a case for them doing that, woof. Like she's like I thought like she was really really bad. Like all of her lines were flat. So I don't know. Maybe that was another thing about like the Bond girls where you're like you have this one character who's played by a really I think solid actress, but she's like basically just there to be sad that James Bond doesn't like her as much as she seems to like him, and the other one is basically like a block of wood.
Mm-hmm. I didn't think Sanchez's girlfriend was awful, but I will say I think the other one was probably a little better. I think her best moment in the movie is when we first meet her, and she says to James, "Are you packing?" And he like pulls out like a normal gun, and he's kind of thinking like, "Yeah, I'm packing." And she looks at it, and she just like shakes her head, and it's like, "Oh, you poor child." And then she pulls out like a gigantic machine gun, and I'm thinking, how did she get this in there? But I thought that was a great moment. And you're right. Like once they like start making out on the boat, then her whole character is like, why doesn't he love me? Why hasn't he fallen in love with me seconds after he met me? And I was actually kind of expecting the other woman to like I don't remember if I said this or I kind of allow myself to get off topic, but like at the end when she instead of them saying like maybe you should get with the president, this guy you've never met, I was kind of expecting her to like take over Sanchez's operation and be like kind of like Shang-Chi, where like at the end this crime lord is gone and somebody rises to fill his position, and then she's like secretly a criminal mastermind and she's been like manipulating James into taking out this guy so that she can run things. You probably wouldn't have liked that because the actress might not have been able to have pulled that off, but that's kind of what I was expecting. And I feel like maybe that would have been better than like I don't want to go home and James Bond doesn't want me, so what if the president will have me?
Yeah, that would have been funny if she 10 rings that joint. Also, you brought that up, that moment with the gun. That was a pretty funny moment. It's also worth noting that for the remainder of the movie, she only uses those tiny little guns that she was scolding James Bond for using.
Yes, and she shoots Benicio del Toro once, and it like doesn't incapacitate him. It just like temporarily is a minor setback, and then she's like surprised that it doesn't have more than one bullet. And I'm thinking like, isn't that your gun? Like, where either that's her gun or she got it from Q, and I don't know why Q would supply you with one gun that has one bullet. But you're right, she should have used her giant machine gun.
Yeah. Also, I was thinking that she was like wow, why is she like so sad that James Bond isn't in love with her? And then it's like revealed that there might be more going on because she was actually trying to get closer to Sanchez because she was actually in contact with a guy who was in Sanchez's inner circle, and that was actually how she and Felix were connected, was kind of through this plan that they had. And that's kind of brought up that, and I like the implication of that, where James Bond is all kind of like, there's he is so into getting revenge that he's not considering all the other angles. Like we alluded to earlier, where there's like the Hong Kong ninjas who are also trying to get in on Sanchez. There's Charlize Theron looking lady who was working with Felix to get in on Sanchez. Like there's a lot of stuff going on, and James Bond with his revenge is actually kind of blowing up all their plans. And I kind of like that element.
Yeah, but after we find out that so I guess she just wanted some extra cash because she was going to go in and try and do a deal with Sanchez anyway. But then she's like, "Oh yeah, I could use 75,000, sure." But then after we find that bit out, then she's still upset at the end of the movie when she sees James kissing Sanchez's girlfriend.
Exactly, that's what's disappointing about it.
Also, apparently that lady was married to Richard Gere for a few years. That I don't know if I've seen her in anything else, but that might be what she's most well known for, that or this movie.
Is she part gerbil? Sorry, that's a really old joke. I'm sorry, everybody.
There was something about the Bond girls I was going to bring up. And oh yeah, okay. So at one point she is like going to try and sneak into Sanchez's like operations. So she's like batting her eyes at Wayne Newton, who is like he's like a public televangelist or something who works for Sanchez, and his job is to like announce stuff on TV, I guess. But she's like, hey, I like you. And so they go into his room, and then she like pulls a gun on him and then grabs like what looks like a monk's robe. And I guess her intention is to like sneak around because other people will probably be wearing robes like that. But then like as soon as she plans to like go in disguise, James has already started a huge fire in the lab. And so then she's just like running around, and she saves James at one point, but it almost feels like you really didn't need the scene where she's like, tricking Wayne Newton and then she's like running around in a white robe. Like it really feels like they probably could have kept her for the climax, but they keep doing stuff with her. Like at one point she's flying a plane, and then one of the wings of the plane gets shot up, and then she has to land the plane, so then she has to steal a car. And it kind of reminds me of what you were saying with the Shang-Chi movie, where like every character kind of has to have a moment in the climax. And I was surprised that Desmond Llewellyn isn't in there like riding a bicycle and like shooting at people as James is like switching vehicles and she's switching vehicles.
Yeah. You know, that's a good point. By the way, Desmond Llewellyn has like the most relatable moment ever, where the girls are getting catty with one another, and it just cuts to a close up of him rolling his eyes.
Hmm.
I was like, hey, same,
Also,
same man.
also when Richard Gere's ex-wife, when she says, I can't believe that he slept with Sanchez's girlfriend, and Q says, well, an agent has to do what he has to do out in the field, and I like he might as well have said, oh, this is nothing. He slept with hundreds of women. You mean nothing to him. I was really expecting something like that.
Hey, lady, let me tell you about Sylvia Trench. All right.
Hmm. Um,
um,
I
but
I don't know if I have anything else to say. I'm sure we've got more ground to cover. I just can't think of what else to talk about.
how
I
do you feel
do
about the bad guy?
I like him. This guy was in the Goonies. That is what I know him from. He is the one who is singing opera in the Goonies. I much like how you headcanon that Big Ed is dabbling in some crime and also as a CIA agent. I headcanon that Sanchez didn't actually, or well, I guess this is set after the Goonies, but I was just trying to think of a way that he doesn't actually get caught on fire, and then he goes back and he's in jail, and then he gets with his brother, who's Joey Pants, and his mom, and then they get taken into custody because of some kids. Unfortunately, I don't think that works, but I
Yeah,
do like this guy.
yeah. He's actually in another movie that I may be picking for this podcast soon. So,
Oh, okay. I like
hmm,
how this character, how he says at the beginning of the movie, loyalty is more important to him than money. And then we see at the end how that really isn't true, because the one guy who looks like he might be like a, I don't know, fifth grade science teacher, he's like, you already made a deal with these Asian guys. We can't let this lab blow up. And he says, I don't care about the deal. Like, get this product out of here and let's let it burn. And so even though like I find the idea of a bad guy saying that loyalty is more important to him than money, I find that idea interesting. But then he kind of backs out on it anyway. But I feel like this is in some way kind of a callback to Goldfinger. In Goldfinger, it's not paced exactly the same because in this it's like 20-25 minutes before the end of the movie when Sanchez finds out that Bond is working against him. But in Goldfinger, like there's that part where they're playing golf with each other, and then he tells Goldfinger like he's about to be killed, and he says, "Well, I know about Operation Grand Slam," and Goldfinger then spares his life. And in this movie, Bond says, "I know about what I don't remember what he said, the Stingers, I think," and I don't know what he was talking about, but he knows about something. And Sanchez says, "Wait, what do you mean?" And then it doesn't work. Like when Bond says something, then Sanchez is like, "Okay, I'm just gonna let you die." And so it's kind of an inversion of what happened in Goldfinger. I thought that was kind of funny.
yeah. You're right. There is actually quite a bit of Goldfinger going on here. I think Sanchez, like, yeah, in his plan and in kind of the way he carries out his plan, and how he kind of has his downfall. It is actually pretty reminiscent of Goldfinger. Um, I think just like kind of just general aesthetics though. You've not seen any of the Roger Moore movies, right?
Correct.
Okay. The first Roger Moore movie is Live and Let Die, which is basically a black exploitation movie
Oh,
where James Bond spends a lot of the time just in like New York, uh, a la the French Connection, fighting drug dealers in Harlem, and it's very strange. It's very strange for like somebody's first James Bond movie, right?
hmm.
It's not exactly what you think when you think James Bond. I think maybe that was probably the point. But this does sort of have a lot of, I think, in common with Live and Let Die as well, in terms of like the whole drug trade and James Bond kind of trying to, it's in a sort of Goldfinger way, pose undercover as a sort of a buyer or a ally to the villain, even though he's actually trying to deceive the villain, and maybe the villain knows he's trying to get deceived. So yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty fun villain. I think Robert Davi does a really good job. I think he does a good job of not being boring, even though he doesn't ever really like yell, or he's not like some maniacal, crazy, want to take over the world guy. The Roger Moore era got really dominated by people who wanted to take over the world. Um, so I like this guy, and I think his screen presence is really, I think, cool. And he he feels very sinister without having to do a whole lot.
Yeah. He has probably my favorite moment in the movie when he puts the guy who is an evil admiral in Star Trek Insurrection. He puts him in the decompression chamber, and then he starts like turning the pressure up, and because James is in a very Thomas Jane Punisher kind of way. He has tricked Robert Davi into thinking that there's a mole in the operation who's betrayed him, and then he plants like a couple million in the decompression chamber on that guy's boat to make Robert Davi think that he is the mole. And then Robert Davi, he throws him in there, and then like he does something. He takes an axe and cuts a cable, and that somehow makes the guy explode. I wasn't really sure how that worked, but he also kind of sort of dies in a similar way in Insurrection. Spoilers for that movie, but my favorite moment in the movie, and that's also, I said that the Felix getting his legs chewed, or Big Ed getting eaten by the shark is the second best death. I think that the decompression chamber thing is the best one. That is living rent free in my mind. When I was a kid, I saw that and I was like, oh man, that's horrifying. I hope I never get thrown in one of those things by a drug dealer. But then someone says, what about the money? And he says, launder it. And I just think that's great. Double entendre. I love it.
That's the best one-liner in the movie. I love that.
Yeah. Also, I'm trying to. I feel like there's someone else in the movie that I'm like completely. Was the guy who played M in this? Had he been M for a little while in the Roger Moore movies, or was he just M during the Timothy Dalton era?
I think he was there at the tail end of the Roger Moore era.
Okay.
That's the like the last 4 movies in the Roger Moore era and the Timothy Dalton, like those 6 movies, like I don't know, man. Like they all bleed together, and it has been like 15 years since I've seen any of them. So like I know Bernard Lee played M for the longest time. I can't remember when his last appearance was. But this M had, I think he showed up towards the end of the Roger Moore era.
Okay. And he gets like 2 scenes, and one of them is just barely him talking to Moneypenny. Moneypenny has, I think, 2 lines of dialogue. She's not in it a whole lot. Q, this might be one of Q's biggest parts in any of the movies, where he's actually out there in the field with James. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I like Q. Desmond Llewellyn's just delightful. I love him.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have much else to say about the movie. Do you have any other points to bring up?
Yeah, I wish that the movie was a little bit more focused in terms of communicating James Bond's plan, because I was just thinking like, okay, you just want to get revenge, just shoot him, like kill him. You know what I mean? It's like you have like all these opportunities, and they're talking about like the boat that's coming that has like mullet dude who gets his head exploded. That guy like he's on some, what's it called, like Wave Crest or something. They keep talking about how Wave Crest is going to get here, and like all of these kind of disparate elements. I was kind of getting confused as to like why any of this was relevant and why James Bond just wasn't going to shoot Robert Davi. I eventually figured that he was probably trying to take down his entire operation, but still, I was like, I wish that the movie had better communicated that, because I did start to get a little bored as James was just kind of trying to get all of the pieces ready.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure if he had a plan. Like, he had a goal of taking down the everything, but I wasn't sure if he specifically had any ideas on how to do that. And so the movie almost works as, here's a bunch of little mini movies where at this point, like, someone brings in Sharky, and then James shoots that guy with a harpoon gun, and then he steals like a plane that has like a few $1 million in it, and that's like the end of one aspect of him trying to take down this whole operation. And then another aspect is like he goes in and he bets with the money and takes out a little bit from the casino, and then he offers his services as a problem eliminator. And that, I feel like each kind of chunk of the movie is just him. Like, I don't know if he's actually planned far enough ahead to say that he has a plan, or if he's just like, okay, now I'm going to try this, and then something gets in his way, like Robert Davi says, I don't really need to hire you, and then like the Hong Kong agents, they kidnap him, and then like he's just kind of going with the flow, and this is working well in my favor, so I'll pretend like they kidnapped me to try and get information about you, and so like, but I don't know if he's actually like sat down and planned anything out.
Right. Yeah. No. I know what you're saying. I feel like there's a point where he is talking to the one girl, and he's like, he's got 2 feet of like glass. Like I need a cannon to be able to get in there. And I feel like somewhere in there, like he must have developed a plan because it gets a little too intricate. And I don't know. I just wish I would have been able to better. I don't know. Better
Uh,
identify what is going on in James's head.
that's fair. Did you like Benicio del Toro in this movie?
Oh yeah, he was really fun. Like he's pretty memorable. It's a pretty small role, but yeah, I would say it's memorable.
Yeah, he gets like 2 scenes. There's three. There's the one where they're putting Felix in with the shark, and then there's the one where he is at the bar, and then the woman points the gun at his crotch, and then there's later at the cocaine plant. You're dealing with a psychopath when someone points a gun at your crotch that can make like a 4-foot hole in a wall, and then he just smiles. You're dealing with somebody who's like not dealing with a full deck at that point. But I thought he was very memorable with what little he was doing here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know his. I don't know his filmography off the top of my head, but I feel like this had to be pretty early because I'm not aware of anything earlier than this where he had a big role.
Yeah, no, this has to have been one of his earliest roles because when I think about him like really kind of blowing up, it's the early 2000s with movies like Traffic, and I should look it up what else he's been in, but I don't know, like he's 89 is really early, and he's so skinny.
He kind of reminds me a little bit of Robert Pattinson in this movie. Like
I
there
can see it absolutely. Yeah.
Specifically, I was thinking of like when James is hanging above the cocaine grinder and he's trying to cut James down so he'll fall in it. I was like, when he jumps down there, I was like, oh wow, he kind of reminds me of Robert Pattinson a little bit. But I mean, I wouldn't say they look similar now, but just looking at this, I kind of saw glimpses of it.
Yeah, this was his second film credit.
Oh wow,
His
that's
his first film credit was as Duke, the dog-faced boy in Big Top Pee-wee.
oh
That was the year before.
Okay, well, he really lucked out getting a memorable James Bond role in his second role because he's not like he's the big villain and he doesn't have a whole lot of screen time, but he, like I said, he does really well with what he's given.
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't realize this. Okay, so this is off topic, but it's kind of related to a bit of like a comic book sort of thing. The Salkinds, they produced the Superman films.
Yes.
So in 1992, that was the 500th year anniversary of Christopher Columbus's voyage.
Mm-hmm.
This is all going to be kind of relevant, I suppose. But and there were a bunch of movies that year that were all about Christopher Columbus. One of them was Ridley Scott's 1492, Conquest of Paradise, which I maintain it's a pretty underrated movie. It's not great, but it's all right. But the other one that was very notorious was Christopher Columbus: The Discovery, which is reimagining Christopher Columbus as a pulpy adventure hero adventurer. This was produced by the Salkinds. It starred Marlon Brando, and it featured Benicio del Toro, and it was directed by John Glenn. That's the movie he did directly after this movie. So,
wow, who was Columbus in that movie? Was it Brando or Benicio?
Oh, it was neither of them. It was some guy named George Corafas.
Oh, okay.
He was such a big deal that he was third billed.
Okay.
So you have Marlon Brando top billed as Tomas de Torquemada. Then second billed is Tom Selleck as King Ferdinand V. but Christopher Columbus was originally intended to be played by Timothy Dalton.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and also Robert Davi was in that movie. So it was a kind
Wow.
of a big License to Kill reunion, it sounds like.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder if John Glenn just figured, like, I really like working with Timothy Dalton and Robert Davi, so I'm just going to try to get as many of these guys, because some directors will do that. That you'll kind of notice a pattern on who they cast, and I won't begrudge directors, because if you enjoy working with someone, you're going to want to make it easier on yourself to make the movie. If you're not going to deliberately cast a prima donna who's going to make your life more difficult, but also sometimes you'll make fun of, like, I don't know, someone like Rob Zombie who casts the same people all the time, or Tim Burton. I almost said Timothy Burton. I don't know why I did that, but yeah, that would have been interesting if Tim Dalton had been. Now I'm doing it again. If Timothy Dalton had been in that movie.
Yeah, and good luck finding that movie anywhere, because I can't.
Oh, okay.
You can find the VHS on eBay, but I don't have the VCR, so.
Yeah, me neither. So I don't have anything else to say about the movie. Do you have any other final thoughts on this movie?
I liked how the lighter came back into play. The Felix lighter.
Yeah. I unfortunately the movie had already done two pretty good gruesome kills at that point, so catching him on fire comes in at a distant third, but it was a nice little callback to the item that he got earlier.
Yeah, I like it as a kind of like a poetic kind of way. But you're right, as far as just like normal kills go, it I mean, I would put it like, I guess, yeah, third, distant third. Yeah.
I'm glad you chose this, because I have not seen what was the other one that Timothy Dalton did, Live and Let Die, or
Oh, that was The Living Daylights.
Living Daylights, yeah. You could, I feel like I said this once and somebody made fun of me for saying this. So many Bond movies have die or death or kill, like License to Kill.
They do.
There's Die Another Day. And when there's like 30 something movies, I guess then like some of them are going to have similar titles, and part of that is these movies are using titles that Ian Fleming came up with, but it's hard for me sometimes to keep them all straight. But I have not seen the other Timothy Dalton Bond movie, but I'm kind of want to go back and watch that now, because I enjoyed this one quite a bit. So maybe instead of just trying to watch all 29 Bond movies in a row, I maybe just need to like pace myself and watch the Sean Connerys, and then a few months later watch the Roger Moores, and just kind of work my way through that way.
Yeah, that would. Yeah, because if you get burnt out on James Bond after, like, at the end of the Connery era, then maybe start with the Moore era, whenever you get back into it, and just kind of pick eras at random. And I would recommend not trying to watch all 25 in one go, because that's going to be rough. I'll just let you know that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I've attempted a few times, and like I said, I just couldn't do it. So I probably wouldn't be able to do it again.
But I got a question for you. What are we talking about next time?
Yes, we are going to do something we have never done before. We're going to do a double feature of one movie we have seen and one movie that I don't know if you have seen, but we have not talked about. But Michael Parks was in two Quentin Tarantino movies. Death Proof, actually he's probably in more, but specifically he played the same character in Death Proof and Planet Terror. I'm sorry, one of those is not a Tarantino movie, but Tarantino is in it. It's directed by Robert Rodriguez. But Planet Terror and Death Proof. We are going to do a sort of double feature, if you don't mind, Connor. For anyone who's listening, you might vaguely remember that Connor and I did talk about Planet Terror a long time ago, and you had just marathon through the Fast and the Furious movies. They're about family. That's what's so powerful about them. And then you had you sort of burned yourself out on schlock movies, and so you weren't feeling it when we talked about Planet Terror. But we are going to give another go at these two movies with, like I said, the same character, the sheriff, is played by Michael Parks. He's kind of got a cameo in both movies, maybe a smaller role in Death Proof than in Planet Terror, but I'm looking forward to this because we have talked about, as far as Tarantino movies go, we've talked about Jackie Brown, The Hateful Eight, and one more recently. What was it that we did? Django, yes. Also, old Django in Django Unchained, the one when Jamie Foxx says it's spelled Django, and the older guy who says, "Yeah, I know," and he was in like some of the Django movies from the '70s. That guy is in License to Kill. He plays like one of the henchmen.
What? Oh, I know it. Frank Nero. Oh, okay.
I think so. I hope I'm not. I just saw like a familiar face when I was looking through the cast, and then I clicked him, and it said he was in. Before I let you go, I'm gonna double check on that, and I'm having to like pull the cast back up right now, and it's some reason it's not wanting me to. There we go. View all. Sorry. We're gonna get to the bottom of this right now because I just said it, so I probably should have quadruple checked before I said that on the air. But it's oh no, where is he on here? Oh no, I don't see him on Google. I'm sorry. Anyway, it's a guy that I'm fairly confident was in one of the Django movies. He might not have been Django, but he was in one of those maybe. Anyway, so
well, I got a question for you then. I got a question for you
Yeah.
about this. Do you have like the entire? Are you going to be watching both like versions on DVD that are like extended versions of it, or are you getting like the entire double feature that's like the 3-hour engagement on like one disc? Or how are you doing that?
I have both movies separate on DVD, and I think one of them, or maybe both of them, are like a double disc set. So are you thinking of watching like all the trailers and stuff too?
Well, because I owned the Grindhouse double feature, but as the theatrical double feature thing. So I know when they released them both on disc individually, they're extended cuts of the movie. So we might be talking about different versions of the movie, but that could be fun to contrast. So
Yeah, because I am the one I own the separate versions, and I don't think I've even seen all of the trailers that came in between those movies when they were released together in theaters. But by the way, I was wrong. It wasn't Frank Nero. It was a guy named Don Stroud. He was in Django Unchained, but he is not that guy. He's Sheriff Bill Sharp. So different guy altogether. I apologize. But yeah, I'm gonna look and see. They may have like some of the extra material that's in the version that you have, but I'm not sure. So we might end up watching different versions. But like you said, it'll be kind of interesting to kind of say this is what happened in my version. Did this happen in yours?
I am looking forward to this because I have seen Planet Terror since we've talked about it, and I have a lot more to say about it. So I'm excited for that. And Death Proof, I also have a lot to say about. So I'm excited about this.
Death Proof, I'll get more into this when we talk about it. Death Proof was my first Tarantino movie that I ever watched.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember seeing the trailers for both of these movies when I was in high school. I think when I was seeing the trailers, I didn't even understand that it was two separate movies. So like I remember seeing Rosario Dawson say like, "Let's kill this guy," and then also seeing Rose McGowan like with the machine gun leg. And I remember thinking like, "Are these in the same movie? This is weird." And so I didn't even understand that it was like a double feature. But yeah, that was my first entrance into the world of Tarantino.
That is an interesting introduction.
Yeah.
That's cool though. Well, all right.
Okay. So we will be back talking about these two in a couple weeks. In the meantime, I am the Comics Kid 2099.
And I am Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.